In this video, I'll show you how to install your new dust collection chute on your Hercules HE74 Dual Bevel sliding miter saw. And if you have a different model, please consult my website, shopnationstore.com, to see if this is compatible with the model you're looking at or if I offer it as another product. Turns out all of these are very specifically designed to the saw, so if you have a different model number, chances are that it won't fit. And before we get started, I'm obligated to say by adding this part to your saw, you're changing the saw's OEM design. Anytime you make any change to a power tool, just be careful and be mindful that it can and will change the intended function of the tool. And in this case, the dust collection is going to be greatly improved, but there's some metal guarding that we are going to remove. And luckily, you only need a couple of tools for this installation. You'll need 3 Torx drivers, T15, T20, T25, a Phillips screwdriver, and some snips for potentially trimming some zip ties. And of course, it goes without saying, unplug the saw before doing anything. And the first thing we need to do is get the utterly pointless dust collection stock fitting out of the way. And to do that, we're first going to remove this screw here to gain access to some screws we got to remove. For that, you're going to use your T20 driver here and just back this out, removing this screw and letting the arm just kind of fall straight down. Next up, we're going to get this rear metal blade guard out of the way, and there's a total of 4 screws, 2 on each side of the blade housing, and those are removed with your T20 driver. And be careful not to lose these screws because we're actually going to use these to install our new dust collection chute. Using that same T20 driver, there's actually 2 brackets on either side of this fitting that need to come out. There's 4 screws, 2 on each side. And this thing's wedged in here pretty good, so you actually need to remove the brackets from the frame itself. This side, there's 1 T20 screw, and on the opposite side, there's actually 2 T15 screws. Go ahead and take those out. It helps that the saw slid all the way forward for this. And with that, this should now be loose. Kind of if you push forward and then drop it straight down, you'll take it out. Here's what all the parts look like laid out once you've removed them. The only parts you'll be reusing for this installation are these 4 screws and this screw and spacer that holds the blade guard arm. Now in your box, you should receive the chute body itself, a hose transition piece, a section of expanding hose, 2 zip ties, a flexible flap, and a set of 5 Phillips screws, and potentially, depending on what options you got, 1 or 2 hose transitions. If your parts don't look exactly like I'm showing here in the video, that's okay, but the installation process is identical. The first thing you want to do is actually take your chute body itself and the flexible hose. I found it helps to kind of stretch out the end here just to help get the thread started, but you're just going to turn that in a clockwise fashion. You'll feel it start to grab. You just want to thread that on until you got a nice even engagement around the top. It's held in place. Next, we're going to actually install the flexible flap in this front groove on the front of the chute. Take your flap, starting at one end, just kind of feed it into that slot, pushing all the way back. Then you're going to take 4 of the 5 Phillips screws that should be in the bag and screw them through the holes from the outside, capturing the flexible flap, working from one side, going all the way to the other. Just make sure the flap is fully seated before you tighten the screw. Then we're going to take our assembly and install it in the location of the rear metal blade guard that we removed earlier, using the same 4 screws that were originally on the saw. And these are going to thread directly into the plastic, so you'll feel them kind of bite in a little bit. Make sure to get all the screws started before tightening them down, and keep in mind that you're threading into plastic, so don't go crazy. Now's a good time with the saw off and unplugged to check for clearance by spinning the blade and making sure nothing's touching. Alright, with that all clear, let's go ahead and get the blade guard arm reattached. That arm should have plenty of clearance around the dust chute assembly. Alright, last step is to attach this hose transition piece, which threads on just like the main chute body assembly. Keeping the hose stationary and only rotating the transition piece, threaded on the threads just like before. And that's essentially it. There are 2 included zip ties that you can loop through these loops on either side of the hose transition piece. You can use that to attach to the handle or some other part. I actually found that just leaving it loose like this and having the hose drape over the back is the most efficient, but you do have that flexibility if you choose. Now in terms of hose connections, the standard hose transition piece fits most dust extractor fittings, which tend to be on the smaller side, like this from 3M. This also fits the D27 Festool hose connection. If you have a different hose setup, I do sell a variety of adapters that have kind of a quick turn lock feature so they won't come off during use. And I've got all of the OD and ID dimensions listed on my website so you can find the exact adapter for your situation. Thank you so much for your support. I sincerely hope this makes your life better. If anything, just helps keep your shop a little cleaner. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll leave my email down below, or you can always head to my website, shopnationstore.com.